let's see what Fly Me Out and Big Dumb Gaming are able to do as game number 1 gets going.
So we see already from the get-go a little bit of a difference in comp here, as we see the Rogue on Fly Me Out side plus the Holy Paladin, and on the other side we see the Mistweaver and a Demon Hunter instead.
Yeah, and I wonder what the choice... the Rogue has to be something that that Versify is just used to playing. It might be his main on live. I don't particularly know, because apparently I'm not as... I'm not like Tettles or Dratnos. I don't know everything about all these players, but it might just be a comfort pick. You might be more comfortable playing that character other than the Demon Hunter, because usually the mage pick reminds me a lot of the very first MDI we had 3 years ago, where teams were playing double warrior, and because warrior was such a strong DPS pick, you had to play around their cooldowns. I think mage is kind of in that same boat, where you pretty much have to play around combust, and not having that extra magic damage taken debuff that the Demon Hunter brings. Just kind of you're losing around 5% damage for your DPS carry. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I agree, and you're also missing out on the physical buff because you're not running the Mistweaver, right? So they're missing out on both physical and magic damage increase for all of their DPS, which will definitely matter in the long run. So they better have some very sick pulls coming out on their side to make up for this, for the debuffs that they're missing out on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one small thing that I kind of would have liked to see here, if it was possible, would see the Combust Ignite spread to the Pummeler, even though it does take reduced damage right now because of that platinum plating debuff that it has at the start of the fight. It's just free damage on the Pummeler. Spreading a 200k Ignite to the boss would be pretty nice, but small things, not really that big of a deal. We do see a little bit of it coming from actually from Big Dumb Gaming. They're definitely getting some cleave from their mage there, so you do like to see that from them, but really these teams are pretty neck and neck right now.
Yeah, most definitely. One thing to note is that Fly Me Out actually saved their Bloodlust, while Big Dumb Gaming actually used it here. Now we're probably gonna see a Bloodlust again on the second boss, like we've already seen before one of the other mage teams do. But considering that they saved their Bloodlust, and they're actually slightly faster compared to Big Dumb Gaming, interesting.
Yeah, it's not really what you want to see. You don't want to see a team barely winning on a boss when they committed their Bloodlust, or rather, they're going to lose on the boss because of that hammer smash on the Pummel at the last second. It's going to be neck and neck with one team committing their Bloodlust, and that's just not the best sign for your team when you commit your Bloodlust and still barely have the same time on a boss kills the other team. So I'm interested to see what this Bloodlust usage is going to be out of Fly Me Out, because we do know this is a pretty tight time to dungeon. It's both of these teams were somewhere in the 15 to 17 minute range for the time trial time, so they're going to have to use their first Bloodlust within the first 5 minutes here if they want to for sure get a good second use out of it, especially on the pull on the final boss. It wouldn't surprise me to see them use it with Trash on Kujo here, actually.
Yeah, it looks like they used their shroud here to go past these two bigger mobs here to start, and now we're going to see this big pull where you definitely want to make use of line of sight, because not only do these living wastes explode on death, but you also have a lot of explosives spawned at the same time. I'm not really sure if they have enough damage to finish those off. Okay, you see the Hunter actually finishing them off. So now all of them explode. They only have the two bigger HP mobs left, and I assume they're going to pull it on top of the boss. So Kujo actually is getting engaged by Fly Me Out, as they do use their Bloodlust finally to increase their damage on the boss and also make sure they finish off this last trash that they still have from the pull before. Now, Big Dumb Gaming on the other side, they did a very similar thing, but they did not pull the boss yet. So it looks like, okay, so now they actually engaged the boss as well. They're slightly behind because of the fact that Fly Me Out, they actually shrouded some of those mobs, right? So it looks like they're slightly... Yep. Oh no, Bailey's actually going down on Kujo's side.
Yeah, that's not ideal timing, because they're not going to be able to get him up right away because they have to go behind the boss for this Venting Flame, so their tank's going to have to stay alive for this entire Venting Flames cast with no healer, and I don't think that's really possible in this Grievous environment. Sinect is going to go down here, and that's going to be a full team wipe for Big Dumb Gaming. That's, not a great start to the dungeon, whereas over on the side of Fly Me Out, you see that insane burst from the mage, getting that free cleave onto all those ads, really good damage out of them. It seems like we do have a little bit of a connection issue to that team, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be fine on their side as we do catch up to them just about now. And yeah, just clean runs so far from Fly Me Out, but at this point a full wipe for Big Dumb Gaming on the boss is going to be rough for them, especially since they committed all the cooldowns there.
And this is actually the second time this happens to them. They've already played this dungeon earlier, and they also had a wipe on this second boss. So I'm not really sure if they maybe just take on too much there. Or maybe they also need to hold their Bloodlust instead of using it in the first boss. Maybe they also have to hold it for the second boss, like we see Fly Me Out do here, to make this pull a little bit easier for them, as this seems to be not working out for them, as Fly Me Out is already on 10% here in Cujo, and 0 deaths, so clean run by them so far.
And one of the things that's interesting about the mage pick is that it really is, I mean, it's not necessarily the most technically difficult DPS spec to play, but in terms of timing, it's probably the most difficult spec to play, because the thing that really sets off mage and makes it incredibly strong is using the double on-use trinkets, using the Font of Ashara together with another on-use trinket. And the problem with that is that you really have to be aware of when you're going to use your combust about 20 seconds in advance. And the difficulty there is that you really only have a 4-second window to time that properly. And if you don't time it properly, you're going to lose out on one of your trinkets, which means you're going to be missing 4,000 intellect during your combust, which definitely reduces the value of the character you're playing a lot in the overall, setting of the dungeon. So I think maining a mage on live and understanding how to properly time your cooldown windows in advance is going to be something that we're going to see from main mages like Asuna here for Fly Me Out, or I'm Fired Up for Limit later on if they play a workshop. I think it's going to be something we really need to keep an eye on.
I really hope Asuna is better at timing his damage cooldowns than he is at timing his movement, because we just saw him run into this fire and then blink in place as well. But he did finally manage to get to this trash pool here. Mage definitely a little bit slower than the rest of the team, but didn't manage to get there as well. As Big Time Gaming re-engage Cujo now. They did clear the trash without the boss this time around, just playing it a little bit safer, making sure the trash dies before and then engage Cujo. But yeah, this is a big time difference now.
Yeah, you saw that latent arcana channeled from Asuna maybe like 10 seconds ago, so that means he's planning on combusting on these 3 packs probably about 5 seconds from now, getting that double on use trinket. You see the Lucid Dreams is popped, there's the combust, and that means he's got a bunch of damage for this trash pack. He's probably going to do something like, if I had to guess, 350k with the spread ignite here by the end of his combust, and that's just kind of the power of the fire mage. They just decimate packs when they have combustion up.
Yeah, actually did reach almost 350k here as all the muffs go down, and the rest of the damage dealers just look like they were AFK compared to the damage that the mage was doing here. But obviously, when you're in a coordinated group like this, then you're not gonna overlap your cooldowns with a mage's combustion unless it's something like the awaken mobs with the last boss. Then of course you can line up whatever cooldowns you have. But in a pro like this, you just want to have the mage's combustion because that's just going to be all you need.
Oh yeah, and of course the problem with mage is similar to that warrior thing we were talking about back in the first MDI. That's when they don't have combust up, they kind of do this.
Yeah.
Less single target damage than the healer, but that's the trade-off you get for playing a class that's so cooldown oriented, which is a little unfortunate. But the hunter can carry you in that situation. They've got cooldowns on single target pretty much all time.
True. One thing to note as well is that Versify is actually playing Assassination Rogue. Most of the time we see Outlaw, but we've seen Asa in the past in single target focused dungeons, which Workshop definitely is one of those dungeons, so that's probably why we see the Asa Rogue come out from Versify here.
Well, the other thing is there's not really that much mass AO in this dungeon that you're not pulling whenever the mage has combustion up. So really, all the rogue really needs to do is off dot for energy gains or something like that, and then the mage ignite will just take care of the cleave on its own. With also the passive cleave that the BM hunter brings as well. So it makes a lot of sense. And on top of that, the thing, just the mage tends to bring really important damage whenever its cooldowns are up. Obviously, you have the trade off of doing no damage when your cooldowns are down, like we already talked about, but if your mage is taking care of all the free cleave, why not play the better single target spec? It makes tons of sense here, especially on Tyrannical.
Yeah, definitely agree here, especially because, one thing that is interesting though about this Asa Rogue is that you have Explosive, right? And Outlaw Rogue is just so good at dealing with the Explosive because they can cleave off of them without really losing any damage at all. So, not really sure how good Asa Rogue is at dealing with them, but I assume not as good as Outlaw Rogue.
Well, you have the BM Hunter for that as well, right? Yeah. They're pretty good at dealing with them too, so that's also something they can make, and it's not an issue when you're thinking about, whether or not you really need that class to take care of those explosives. The only real major issue is when you have multiple explosives like we just saw, but still even then, the BM Hunter can deal with it. But there you go again, double on use, mage popping up to 500k DPS, pretty much soloing the trash on his own, almost 600k. This is kind of reaching unholy levels of DPS on this size trash. Obviously, when you talk about pulling an entire Kragma room, mage isn't going to get anywhere near that damage. But for packs that are this size, mage is definitely something that's incredibly strong for this type of pull.
See, this is why I hate playing with mages on live servers, because they just take away your damage, you know? They just take it. And there's no way you can compete with their overall. It's just mean.
Well, if they can take it, it's theirs to take, right?
But they're mainly just padding, let's be honest here.
But they aren't hitting the other mobs at all. They're hitting one target. How is that padding?
Okay, moving on. Okay, so they actually pulled off this trash pull with the boss very cleanly on Fly Me Outside. Let's be honest, because we've seen a lot of teams already struggle on this a lot. We've seen teams wipe, we've seen a bunch of deaths coming in, even though they did recover, but 0 deaths, and didn't even look like a big problem for them at all. And when I saw all of those explosives spawn at the start, I thought they're gonna be in trouble, because I mentioned that the rogue is not playing Outlaw, but not a big deal at all for them with dealing with the explosives. And I think one thing to note as well is that, I mean, Holy Paladin can help out with those explosives a lot better than some of the other healers probably.
Oh, that's something I didn't even think about. Yeah, true. They probably can just, one-shot it with a Holy Shock or something like that. So, yeah, they've got a good comp for dealing with explosives pretty easily here. Although at this point, to have a bad comp at dealing with explosives would be pretty ridiculous. I mean, most comps typically have, 2 characters that can deal with explosive, but that's not good. Suffer going down. They don't have a regular battle rest, so they're going to have to, hopefully get him up in the space of this bubble, but I don't know if they're going to be able to get this down. The mage is trying his hardest to kite, but they have to try to get a battle res on him here.
Okay, they got the battle res off.
Oh, barely got it off. Wow.
Hopefully they get the taunt. So only Versify going down. Good on them for being able to kite the boss for so long. It felt like he was dead forever. But now they finally got the res back up. They should be able to recover as the boss is so low at this point. But you also have an ad up that you see at the sides, which is doing a lot of damage as well to the closest target, which seems to be the mage. So he's off-tanking this ad and they're just finishing off the boss. But yeah, almost a disaster here at the very end of the boss fight.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the typical themes we've been talking about the entire time, as we see another full team wipe come out from Big Dumb Gaming, unfortunate from them. They just got a ton of explosives all at the same time. That was really weird to see. They had like 5 explosives, and that was while the tank was, setting the mobs up together. So they had no way of dealing with the explosives outside the tank dealing with them. So that seems like it was just really unfortunate for them. But yeah, well, one of the themes we've been talking about all the time is when mistakes happen, does your team have the wherewithal and the ability to come back from that mistake? And it looks like, so far, Fly Me Out is a team that has that. They dealt with that problem very cleanly.
I agree. Now they're onto these spider tanks where unfortunately can't really make up much time because there's nothing else you can pull on top of it. So we just have to see them slowly get down these bots here, these spider tanks, as they now move on to the last boss area. We'll see how much trash they are pulling on the bridge. There's still a lot of percentage they need to do. We've seen some teams skip some of this last trash here, but doesn't seem like Fly Me Out can actually do so. The Bloodlust will be ready soon as well, and I very highly assume they are going to use it on the last boss with the Awakened mobs, because that's such a difficult pull to do when you have a Tyrannical boss plus all of the Awakened mobs at the same time, and you want to, of course, overlap it with your Mage's Bloodlust. I mean, Combustion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when we first saw these strategies coming out from teams pulling 3 or 4 Awakened Obelisks with the final boss back at the Keystone Masters event about a month ago, I think the thing that most players thought that had a good knowledge of the different classes in the game, what class is going to be the best at dealing with this exact thing, cleaving 3 mini-boss style enemies on top of a boss? Fire Mage. It's by far the best burst damage for that scenario, but unfortunately just the overall damage profile of Mage in most dungeons doesn't really lend itself to that, so it's kind of a niche pick like we see in Workshop here on Tyrannical. So I'm interested to see exactly how much faster teams with a Mage in Workshop will deal with that versus teams without a Mage. And if we see Method and A run a Workshop later in this tournament, we'll be able to see that comparison.
Yeah, and we see Big Dumb Gaming now also managed to reach the third boss here. Seems like they have their Bloodlust available, but at this point they probably have to save it to the last boss, even though they might miss a whole usage. But they need it at the start of the last boss when they fight the Awakened mob, so they can't really use it here unless they are for sure that it's still going to be 10 minutes. But at this point you can't really hope for that, because Fly Me Out is already dealing with this last Awakened mob to reach the boss's room, to also dodge this last trash group that they don't have to fight, because the last percentage they're gonna get from the Awakened mobs. Now 2 deaths on their side, again, it was pretty clean, and because they managed to recover from those 2 deaths on the third boss, it's really gonna like make their first game here against Big Dumb Gaming, which unfortunately just had too many problems again in this workshop. Like we've already seen them earlier. 11 deaths, just the wipes on the second boss, just making them fall so far behind.
Yeah, just not enough consistency from them here. Unfortunately, that is the word of the day. So that's really kind of what you need in the MDI in order to have a chance of taking any wins away. But gearing up for this big pull here, I want to see what this mage damage ends up looking like here. Let's see what that combustion looks like.
Yeah, let's see the mage steal all of the damage away from the other two damage dealers, unfortunately, as the combustion is happening right now. You see the bloodlust, all the cooldowns being. Let's see how fast they can act. Now, one thing that is actually a bit annoying here for mages is that these mobs don't all move at the same time, so sometimes you might be missing out on a little bit of your cleave if the boss, for example, doesn't immediately move at the same time as those awakened mobs.
Yeah, that's true. You see the ice block coming out to get rid of that fear as well, and I mean, dude, those awakened mobs just got absolutely destroyed. They're gone already. Yeah. They got ignited is what happened to them. They just got completely destroyed, and you know, there you go. Just like that, the difficult part of the fight is over, and you know, you're on to the normal fight. Just as easy as that, and that's just kind of the strength of mage. We keep talking about it, but it's, you know, it's very much a niche pick, especially for this style of dungeon where you're not doing big trash packs. You know, you like to see it played to perfection like this.
Yeah, very well done by Fly Me Out, especially with this mage pick, as you mentioned. Now, the rest of this boss fight really shouldn't be a big deal anymore, but it is Tyrannical, so there's definitely things that can happen. This, especially the second phase with King Mechagon, just quite a bit of damage with the dot that this sap leaves behind. Especially if you get maybe the class that you don't want it on, maybe on the mage when he's out of ice block, or the hunter if he's out of defensives. So, and Versify actually going down. They do have a battle rest available though, so they can get them back up, but then they're out of battle rests.
Yeah, they are out of the battle rests at that point. It's really weird to see just a random death at this point. I didn't quite see what happened to him. Did he get cutter beamed there? That's just such a weird spot to die.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Especially for a rogue.
Yeah.
Especially for a rogue. What
maybe also, I mean, you can see the sparks also fly around. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult for melee to dodge those. Because you would, of course, not run out of melee range. And I feel like sometimes it's just really hard to see where they're coming from. You do see the arrow, but if they're behind you or really far away from you, then it's sometimes hard to see if they actually go through melee or not. So maybe you could hit one of those and got comboed, not really sure.
Or knocked off.
Or knocked
also
off,
a possibility. You hate to see it if it happened, but you know, it's always something that's in the back of your mind, especially if you're a melee player at the front of the boss like this. If one of those orbs just happens to squeak its way right by you, you're gone. There's no coming back from that. So yeah, hopefully that wasn't what it was, but you know, still weird to see that happen at the end of an otherwise relatively clean dungeon from Fly Me Out. And also, you know, I think one of the things we were talking about as well with mages being popular in this dungeon is because it's a tyrannical dungeon, you do end up getting 2 combustions off in the space of the boss, which, you know, helps you out a lot. You can see, you know, how high that propels the mage on top of the damage meters there.
Yeah, the kill time definitely matters a lot for these kind of combustion bosses. When you have a perfect kill time, the damage can just be insane. Of course, Hunter's also doing really well, but their damage is much more consistent. So if you have a perfect kill time for a mage, it's going to be hard for a Hunter to beat that, especially when you have extra targets with their Awaken Ups on the pool. Now we see Atal'Dazar be on 30% almost here. It's still a Tyrannical fight, so it's going to take them quite a bit to finish it off. But at this point, Big Dumb Gaming just now engaged the last boss. Also, they have the 11 deaths, which also just adds so much seconds to them. At this point, Big Dumb Gaming just has to forget about this dungeon and just move on, make sure they don't get affected by this, make sure they don't tilt, make sure they move on and just play the next dungeon properly, because Fly Me Out is about to finish this off and then they're gonna go 1-0 against Big Dumb Gaming.
Yep, all about that mental game, making sure your head's in the game and you're not tilted going to the next one. But Omega Buster's down at 5%. Once the Omega Busters goes down, King Mechagon will be released, and it's going to be a nice quick 1-0 for Fly Me Out and making that Holy Paladin work in this dungeon, which is something we were kind of critical of earlier on today.
It was, and you know, the whole team, I think, really started pulling their weight as well to recover from that early death from that death on Suffer in Machinist's Garden on that one. So really well played there by Fly Me Out. And like you mentioned before, it's ironic. It's always so impressive to see how teams react when something goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the entire dungeon for them. If they full team wipe there, It could set off some tilt chain reaction, which causes them to wipe again, which gets Big Dumb Gaming right back in the game. But the fact that they had the presence of mind to say, okay, well, I'm a mage, I have aggro, I can kind of run the room a little bit, I can blink, I can get the movement speed from Scorch. One of you try to go get a res off, and you saw Ellesmere bubble himself to try to get the res off, didn't quite work. So, they worked it out. Yeah. They had a plan in place, and they made it work. It was cool to see.
And that's really just what it's all about under that one. And at Tattles, we've seen Workshop a number of different times with how these different polls have been setting up. Looks like BDG did a bit better than their previous Workshop, but it seemed like they were just needed to build up that momentum that really hasn't quite clicked for them yet.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that they just need more practice. I think both of these teams, they need just a little bit to become a little bit more refined in terms of their strategies, and I think that will end up coming with time and with practice. These are two very so in the European region, we saw a lot of veteran MDI talent. In the North American region, the top 4 teams have a lot of veteran MDI talent. The bottom 4 teams, very new to the space, and I suspect that as the weeks go by, both Big Dumb Gaming and Fly Me Out will be able to begin picking up their pace. I feel like this match between the two of them is very good for both of them, and just getting them practice and then getting them prepared just for the weeks that follow.
Yeah, I think if there's anything a lot of like the lower seeded teams should really be looking at, it's last season's MDI when we started seeing Pain for Femme and some of the other teams really start making a push to try to make it to the LAN and really pushing 40K really to their fullest. But before we talk about game number 2, let's start talking about some of the highlights that you got for us.
Yeah, so I didn't have too many highlights just because of how this dungeon ends up working out. But ultimately, Fly Me Out just really, they had a pretty good run. They weren't doing like the most innovative thing. The Assassination Rogue, I don't know if that was like necessarily the best pick. I think they would probably be better off going with the Demon Hunter. But they really did get bailed out there at the end by that Holy Paladin bop with the bubble, then being able to res Suffer. I think ultimately this dungeon, pretty good by both teams. Not exactly the most spectacular thing. Ultimately, though, both of these teams are still fairly good in terms of just the grand scheme of how the MDI ends up working out.
Of course, I mean, it's always that larger level of dedication these teams have to even get there to begin with, right, Negra?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the amount of practice these teams have to put in, not only for the time trials, but then also for the tournament, of course, it's pretty taxing, specifically because it's every second week, right? There's going to be 2 more cups, so every second week, almost a full week of just practicing on tournament realms and just doing the same pulls over and over and over. Just try to pull. If it doesn't work, reset the dungeon, go back in, try it again. So it really requires a lot of patience to just do the whole practicing, and then it also requires you to pull it off once it really matters. So those teams, the qualifying alone is already a big task for those teams. So good job on them for just being here, really.
Yeah, and that's where they're always able to start building up points or start able to, get themselves more ready for what to expect from week to week as well, so that they know really what they want to be going after when it comes down to, for example, a LAN environment. Game number 2, when we're looking at Atal'Dazar throughout this, we haven't seen, I wouldn't say a huge amount of variety in terms of how, like, the broad strokes through it. Massive pulls, double death knights, things like that. Tettles has just been the name of the game, and sometimes it's just things as simple as gravity that's ruining runs for some teams.
Something that is the name of the game, the name of the game though, is getting Ellesmere off of that Holy Paladin and onto the Mistweaver Monk. So we saw him run that in time trials as well. Ellesmere is a very well-known Holy Paladin player, so slotting him into that Mistweaver Monk, I've seen him practicing it a lot off stream. I saw him practicing a little bit on stream as well. Just how he's going to be able to pull this out and how this ends up shaping up with just like the way of the Crane healing and how it ends up all going, I think is going to be just critical for Team Fly Me Out success in this dungeon.
Sure.
Big Dumb Gaming had a better time trial time though. I don't know, man.
Yeah. We've seen that time and time again. It's all about, looking at, well, it's important to compare those time trials as well, but I'd say for most teams, they've had consistently worse appearances, right? So it could be something as simple as, Big Dumb Gaming just being a little bit behind and then Fly Me Out meeting around where they needed to be in terms of the time trials. Yeah, there's about a minute difference, but I think that's usually one of the biggest areas that's just ripe for one team capitalizing off another. I mean, it's ironic. We saw it with the complexity limit game where boss resets and it's 20 seconds down the drain.
You know, not only was that a 20-second time loss for them, but I mean, the time that they ended up having that Atal'Dazar was a full 2 minutes faster than their time trial run. So it can go both ways. You know, usually teams will go slower than their time trial runs, but hey, maybe Fly Me Out and Big Dumb Gaming, maybe they both had bad runs in their time trial times. Who's to say? I mean, it really just comes down to who plays the best in the moment. And if Big Dumb Gaming wants to stay in this tournament, they got to get it done in this map. And they don't have any other chances than that.
That's right. One last shot. One opportunity for them to make sure that they're going to be able to stay in this competition and move on to tomorrow. Game number 2 between Fly Me Out and BDG starts right now.
All right, so we're in Atal again. Now, most of the teams, in fact, all of the teams have done a really big pull at the start. So let's see what Fly Me Out and Big Dumb Gaming are doing as they're gathering a lot of mobs.
Yep, here it comes once again, and we see a hunter hopping on top of the pillar for Team Fly Me Out, whereas it's going to be a rogue for the side of Big Dumb Gaming. So a little bit of a difference in strategy. Actually, Asuna got hit by one of those Juggernaut charges there, which is kind of weird. Usually you stand up there to try to dodge those, but getting hit by them is pretty interesting. It didn't go down, but very, very clean pull from Fly Me Out. That insta-died. I mean, you can see how much kiting Big Dumb Gaming is going to have to go through here. Those Colossi are huge.
Look at the size of those things.
He doesn't want to be anywhere near those. Get him away. No, of course, it's not bolstering. They just get larger and do more damage the higher they... the more mobs die near them. So Tank just needs to get out of dodge, and of course he did. But just the efficiency with dealing with that pull, Fly Me Out was a solid 15-20 seconds faster than Big Dumb Gaming here. And it goes back to what we were talking about literally right before the match started. You know, sometimes these teams just don't have good runs in the time trial.
Yeah.
And you don't really get to see their actual potential until they start playing in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, Fly Me Out did pull a little bit less, as we see a 7% trash difference here. But still, I mean, that extra 7% is not worth it if this pull is going to take you that much longer. Because as long as the pull amount is the same for both teams and Fly Me Out is going to just pull a little bit more on a snapping pull later on, then it's just going to be making up the time there. Now, both of them did commit their Bloodlust for this first pull, which we've seen some other teams actually save their Bloodlust for this Priestess Alunsa pull, but Fly Me Out actually pulling the whole room with Priestess Alunsa without their Bloodlust.
Yeah, no Bloodlust makes this pull a little bit scary, but of course with the double Unholy DK you should be more than fine to just absolutely destroy everything. And of course both teams have an aggro buff for the tank in terms of Tricks of the Trade and Misdirect, so shouldn't be any issues with any of that there. They did get a charge off on the Merciless Assault as everyone was running out to grab their blood debuffs, and it did end up killing Shadow DK. Not exactly what you want to see. Now they do have a Battle Res available for him. I'm not sure if they really need to use that. They will kill the boss in the next transfusion. They should kill the boss in the next transfusion pretty easily.
They missed out on one transfusion, right?
True.
Because the DK was set. So maybe if they missed out on one more, so on 2 transfusion, then maybe it wouldn't. So maybe it's good that they rested here, just to make sure that the second transfusion actually kills off the boss.
I mean, actually, now that I think of it, the second transfusion might not kill the boss. It does about 25% of the boss's HP, so they'll actually have to finish off the rest of this boss here. They'll have to do about 4 or 5% after the transfusion on top of that, just because of that death. And if he didn't die, the boss would be dead right now. So just extra time on the board for them. And when you're given a lead at the start of the dungeon, like Big Dumb Gaming kind of gifted to them, you don't really like to see teams just give it away like that. Actually, because of that, transfusion's about to go off for BDG, and these bosses are going to go down at roughly the same time, just about probably 10 seconds apart.
Yeah. So as they're both now down the boss, we see Fly Me Out moving on. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about the difference in comp is that we see the Rogue on Big Dumb Gaming side, which is interesting because he was playing Demon Hunter before, right? And Demon Hunter would be buffing the Unholy DK's damage by quite a lot, and therefore Demon Hunter would be nice, but they want the tricks of the trade to do those kind of snapping pulls that we see happen right now. You either want tricks or you want the misdirect on the Hunter side on Fly Me Out, and that's why we don't see the Demon Hunter come out from Big Dumb Gaming. Now, both of them doing a pretty interesting snapping pull. They pulled the middle pack, and they also pulled a bunch of sword packs plus Sky Screamer, but Beyblade going down, they rest immediately, and hopefully they can recover.
Yeah, a little bit of a scary moment there. Your healer going down in the middle of this pull is not exactly what you want to see, but they are able to use their battle res and get them up, and they should be totally fine. But because of that battle res, because that time spent making sure the healer's alive, it looks like Fly Me Out's going to pull slightly ahead here. Now, it's worth mentioning both of these teams did the exact same snap, where they actually ended up snapping that center pack on top of both Skyscraper packs. So it's a little bigger than the normal snap size we see here, which is more than likely why they didn't end up snap anything down to Razan like we've normally seen. If we are going to see that kind of pull, it's probably going to be now. But it looks like they're not doing that. I don't know. Asuna hasn't jumped down quite yet. There he goes right now. So they're not going to be pulling the boss.
This is so unfortunate.
But Shadow just died to fall damage.
No, I think he was really low after the fall damage, or did he die while falling down? But they pulled the boss at the same second as he died, and they don't have a battle rest, so they need to reset the boss, because this is going to be a huge channels, even if it's just a fortified setting. But getting a death at the start when you pull a boss is just going to be too much, and that's why they reset. We see Big Dumb Gaming now also jump down. They're also going to engage the boss. Also, they're out of battle rests as well, so both of those teams, no more battle rests left.
Yeah, I was wondering why he wasn't releasing right away, because you can just run straight down to the boss right afterwards. Took a little while for that to happen. But he is now here, and the boss has respawned, so the reset timer there. I mean, we already saw in the matchup earlier today between Method Dene and Complexity Limit that the reset time is enough to lose you a dungeon. So, you know, hopefully that didn't cost him this match here. And on top of that, Razan's on the complete other side of the room from where they are, which just slows down your routing even more. And in the space of us talking about it happening here, Big Dumb Gaming's already at 80% on the boss. Yeah,
and they also pull some of those Sky Screamers on top, as you can see. The Rogue just now walking up, making sure all of those Sky Screamers are being pulled. They want to make sure they interrupt all of those casts, because you don't want to get a fear. We also saw the tank drop really low because of the bleed from Razan, on top of also having to tank those Sky Screamers. So definitely want to make sure that the tank stays alive here, because again, they're out of battle rest, so any death here will be a huge problem for both of those teams. As Fly Me Out now also managed to get back to the boss, and they're not actually that far behind when it comes to boss damage.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the difference between the Hunter and the Rogue again. I mean, Hunter just has such ridiculous single target damage output, even with bad RNG compared to most classes in the game, just because of the consistency they get from running full crit percentage corruption on the tournament realm, because you have any corruption you want available to you. They benefit, I think, more from that from just about any other class on single target. So the Hunter pick is definitely paying off in spades here for Fly Me Out, as they're catching up a little bit, even though they had that boss reset for them.
Yeah, and one thing to note about Razan is that he does do the fixate after every fear cast, but because of all of them being Night Elves, they can just Shadow Melt off the fixate, and we will just continue hitting the tank again. Now that means there's going to be a little bit more tank damage, because he will apply that bleed, as you can see on Fly Me Outside right now. But it is a fortified setting, and they can survive it pretty easily, and therefore they just want to make sure they don't lose the damage from having to kite Razan.
Yep, I mean, that's also something we didn't talk about, is having to kite the boss to the other side of the room too. I mean, that's also a major time loss. That Fly Me Out death while they were jumping down really has cost them this match so far. They were a decent, bit ahead. They even had the death on the side of Big Dumb Gaming that caught them up, gave them an even bigger lead, but man, that just kind of ruined the dungeon so far for them. Now, of course, the major other thing we've been talking about all weekend is just making sure that you stay, clean conscience, clean mind, no tilting. Make sure you play as strong as you can for the rest of the dungeon, because, as we've seen from Big Dumb Guild, they haven't really been that consistent so far this weekend. They're a team that does make mistakes, so you really have to give yourself the best opportunity to win the dungeon, and the best way to do that, of course, is to not make any further mistakes yourself.
Definitely. We also see Big Dumb Gaming now having to deal with this tank buster here in the middle area as Asuna goes down, trying to pull away some of the mobs here, it seems like. Didn't manage to de-aggro them. So one extra death here on Fly Me Outside, as they seem to also be playing the tank buster. No, they're not. Okay, so they're actually doing a snapping pull instead. Now, Big Time Gaming actually, I feel like they have to play this Awaken mob, because they don't have the Hunter to deal with the Spirit Breaker. They don't have the pet to taunt off the tank buster from the boss. From the tank on the last boss, so they have to play this, while Fly Me Out can actually skip it if they choose to do so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a major thing that a lot of people aren't even considering. You're able to play 3 mobs with the Hunter versus the Rogue. That's a big advantage for this team. So if they don't end up pulling that, which unfortunately it looks like they are, because they're running right back to that pillar, it was a good theory, but unfortunately they aren't that confident in their play, it seems. But because of the difference in how they're pulling this, they're going to be able to take this pillar all the way up to Volcall. We saw Big Dumb Gaming take care of the pillar first, which meant that they could only take the pillar to the stairs, as you see that portal there. We also saw this in the Method of Knave versus Complexity Limit game, which is what ended up actually costing Complexity Limit their game.
Yeah.
They messed up on this skip ever so slightly to Volcall, and it cost them 20 seconds and ended up costing them the map. This fly me out strategy, although it might be a tiny bit slower because you have to run with this obelisk all the way up, you have no chance of messing up the skip this way. So we'll see if it's going to end up paying off for them here.
Yeah, it looked like the rogue was actually going out of the realm while everyone else was inside the Nerlotha realm here, moving up to the boss, and then the rogue did stealth past this pack and then engage the boss fight. And if you get in boss combat, then the whole group will get pulled out of the realm, and that's what they used to be able to skip this here. Now, Big Time Gaming on the other hand, Fly Me Out on the other hand, sorry, they are pulling up the mob as you mentioned, so they don't have to do any of those shenanigans. But again, pulling an awakened mob is always a little bit of a time loss just because they're moving very slowly. Sometimes you could kill it much earlier, but you have to stop damage to make sure that you can move it in place. So in the end, Fly Me Out engaging the boss a little bit later than Big Damn Gaming, while they're already on 80% and Fly Me Out is just now in phase 1.
Yeah, really at this point what it's going to come down to is which team is able to execute these last two bosses the cleanest, because they do have the rest of the trash count they need at this point. They just need to pull the final 2 trash mobs on top of the final boss with those 2 pillars, and they'll have their trash count that they need for the rest of the dungeon. And I do think that there is still a slight advantage for Fly Me Out, even though they have the 2 deaths on the board, even though they're slightly behind on the bosses, because they do have the better single target damage and the better burst damage with their comp. The Hunter is slightly better than the Rogue. It's just a matter of whether or not they can, efficiently catch up to where Big Dumb Gaming is right now.
Yeah, I agree. This Hunter damage is really gonna matter on the last boss, especially when you want to cleave down those 2 awakened mobs that both of those teams have to deal with still. Hunter with cooldowns, really good at cleaving down those mobs. Now, of course, rogues can do a lot of damage too, but Hunter still just has a little bit of an edge there. So we'll see if Fly Me Out can catch up on that damage. But Big Time Gaming, they're about to down Volcall. Fly Me Out quite a bit behind, on top of the 10 seconds in death difference.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm interested in talking about, and we can talk about this more after the dungeon as well, but, if Ellesmere is comfortable playing the monk in this dungeon, why wouldn't it be something that you'd want to bring out for the rest of the matches? Because it just seems like you're kind of hamstringing your team, not bringing that debuff and not bringing that Way of the Crane. Obviously, I understand he's a Holy Paladin main, and you kind of want to play your main when you can. It's your comfort pick in most general situations. But if you're comfortable playing monk in a dungeon like Atal'Dazar, where there's a lot of damage intake, there's a lot of big pulls that you need to have that monk for. It's something that I would think that you'd want to consider to bring to other dungeons as well, right?
Yeah, I agree. And he's also doing a very good job so far on their side as well. We haven't seen him do any of those mistakes yet. So, I can see that he's less comfortable with it, and maybe they need more practice time in dungeons because he's playing a class that he's not comfortable with, and that's why he chooses to just play the Paladin. But we've seen a lot of teams before that started participating in the MDI, and they first were playing their main class, whatever it may be, maybe like Elemental Shaman or whatnot we've seen. And in the end, most of those people who were playing an out-of-meta class, they switched to the meta class in the end after they got some experience with the MDI. So maybe we'll see Ellesmere do the same thing later on. And it really seems like he's getting more comfortable on this Mistweaver.
Yeah, that definitely makes the most sense to me. I'd like to see him pick up the monk more and get more used to it, because it definitely is the better MDI style key runner in this certain meta right now. But he's definitely made Paladin work in some dungeons as well, like the previous workshop we saw. But at this point, Big Dumb Gaming is now at 75% as Yasma, as Fly Me Out is just gearing up to pull the boss. But you also have to remember, Big Dumb Gaming has already dealt with one of those obelisk mobs and still has the Blood of Corruptor all the way down to 30%. So we're really going to have to see some massive burst damage come out of Fly Me Out if we actually want to see a little race at the end here.
Yeah, they definitely need to do a lot of damage if they want to catch up to Big Dumb Gaming here. It is a Fortified setting, so bosses don't have as much HP as we see in Tyrannical. But Yasma is just a boss that has a lot of HP. No matter if it's Tyrannical or Fortified, so it's still a boss fight that takes a long time. And on top of that, of course, you also need to put some of the damage in those awakened mobs. Now, the only thing I can see Fly Me Out do here is try to just single target Yasma and cleave down the mobs to just increase their damage, while maybe Big Dumb Gaming was cleaving them down. But it's still a 20% difference at this point. Only 1 death difference now, so 5 seconds. But still, 20% is quite a bit to catch up on.
I missed where that second death came from. I mean, that's a big difference, because if they have one more death to those volatile spiderlings, that'll leave them without any battle reses, and they'll be down on DPS, which definitely would leave an opening for Fly Me Out. But we're also talking in ifs right now, so not really a whole lot of time left on this boss with it being at 30% on Fortified for them to run into one of those spiderlings. Gotta keep an eye on Big Dumb Gaming right now. All eyes are on them. The win is for them right now. They just have to not die at the end here.
Just don't die, Fortified. But 20% on the boss. We see the last Soul Run actually go out here as they pulled it all the way inside this door area. They want to make sure they avoid all of those spiderlings as they move back out. 80% of boss, yeah, Fly Me Out, just slightly too late. The mistakes that they made on their side were just bigger than the mistakes that Big Dumb Gaming made. It was still a really close game though, and this is going to be a close matchup as they down Yasma, and it's going to be a 1-1, and it's going to be the very last game that decides the series.
That's right, BDG showing some life as they win game number 2 in Atal'Dazar. And this is, again, what we've been talking about, making sure that these guys are playing to their own potential throughout this series, Tettles.
Yeah, BDG definitely, as a team, has a lot of potential. And they can flex a lot of different comps. Sham and Hyper both play a lot of different stuff, so they can flex into a lot of different things that other teams may not be able to just flex into. I think, again, it's like we were talking about, both Fly Me Out and Big Dumb Gaming not being fully stacked with a ton of MDI veterans, just need time to be able to, I feel like, come into their own in terms of teams, and Jack related it to 40k. I felt like that was a spot-on example of like what they need to be and like what they need to be striving for and looking forward to moving forward.
Sure. And at this point, you know, this is the first weekend for the North American Cup, and in order for these guys to get that push really to get into the land, for example, there's plenty of time for anybody really that we've seen so far to make it into that top 4. It's much more important for us to get, you know, it's ironic, what's the word?
I don't want to say it.
I won't say it either. They need to continuously be appearing and competing very strongly, Tettles. Let's talk replays.
Yeah.
I won't say that word.
So for replays, ultimately, this match was very close between both of these teams. In the very beginning, we saw Big Dumb Gaming have just like a small couple of errors with the Colossus, and the Colossus ended up chasing Cynic around. And then it looked like Fly Me Out was going to continue the momentum that they had in Workshop and maintain a lead. But then I think resetting Rizan was basically the nail in the coffin for them. It looked like Azuna dropped right on top of Shadow Master, killing him with a Quaking, and then they didn't have a battle res available, so they had to completely reset Rizan. And once that all happened, that was a whole thing. Big Dumb Gaming leveraged that a little bit amount of time advantage that they had in order to be able to just take it into the final boss. Took it into Yasma, played the final boss with those obelisk mobs, and was pretty much spot on from that point forward.
Yeah, that's right. And now that we have the series tied up 1-1, this is going to be our elimination game, and I believe our final dungeon as well, Nagura, is going to be on Freehold, right?
Yeah, so it's going to be Freehold.
Yes.
We've already seen Fly Me Out on Freehold. They only had 1 death, but they did lose the matchup. So interesting to see how this is going to play out. I mean, we haven't seen Big Dumb Gaming yet on this map, so anything can happen. Now, it also might just be the deciding thing on who's going to do the kiting strat and who doesn't know how to do it, because that's definitely something we've seen in Freehold.
I would love to see a Holy Paladin kite this. I don't know if I use ironic. I know you're a big fan of Mr. Your Monk, and I applaud you for that. You know, you may not be a friend to Warlocks, but you're certainly a friend of mine. I'd still love to see other classes do it. I'm absolutely incredibly intrigued by the idea of having multiple healers doing this kite strat. Part of me hates it, but the other part of me loves like the pressure that gets put onto the healer and the job that they have to pull off there.
Oh, I mean, the second that Limit finished the run, I messaged Twisted. I'm like, yo, dude, your hand's okay after that? He's shaking. He's like, I was scared there was a pebble in front of me. I didn't know it was going to happen. But yeah, it's just a tough strategy in general. There's so much pressure on you and you alone to make that strat work. Yeah. You know, everyone upstairs fighting Harlan Sweet has it easy. There's not really that much damage going out, so you just have to make sure that you don't die. And I think Holy Paladin's a class that could make it work technically. They do have their horse from ability to get away from mobs. They don't quite have as much mobility as the monk. You know, one of the monks get away out of jail free cards is that Transcendence. If they back themselves into a corner,
Boop.
They could set up Transcendence to get themselves out of it.
Yeah.
So I think Paladin could work. I think it'd be a lot more difficult than Monk, though.
Sure. I mean, yeah, what I would say to your friend Twisted, though, is what, I heard Lighty say one time when he was playing, playing some very difficult levels of PoE. Just hands, calm down. It's not that scary, okay? They're just pebbles that you have to worry about under that. Rating checks are going out for our teams as Fly Me Out and Big Dumb Gaming are both facing elimination as Fortified, Skittish, Bolstering. I feel like we've been in Freehold a lot, Nagura. I
Definitely.
feel like we've been in here a lot.
Yeah.
But let's start it off. They're set to go. Let's take it away.
Yeah, and we already had Bolstering in EU as well last weekend, so seems like these teams can't catch a break and they can't show us those big pulls that we usually want to see in this dungeon here. Unfortunately, Bolstering not really making it possible to pull a lot and also not pulling things on top of bosses, which is something we want to see them do without Bolstering. But both of those teams starting off doing a very similar pull.
Yeah, one of the problems we saw from Fly Me Out earlier today when they were going up against, I believe it was Ethical in this dungeon, is they just were not having clean pulls. Their bolstering management was not great. They were ending up with a lot of, especially on this first pull, both of their enforcers were at like 15-20% when the rest of the mobs are dead, so they were bolstering a lot, and it just wasn't that great in terms of overall consistency throughout the entire dungeon. So I want to see them, level that up. I want to see them play well, and so far in this first pull, looks like they're doing a better job than we're seeing from Big Dumb Gaming.
Yeah, and one thing to note as well is that the Holy Paladin is actually kind of enabling the Unholy DK a little bit on these pulls because of Skittish, right? So you have the Bob on the Unholy DK. He can just pop his cooldowns and ignore Skittish and just go all in because of that Bob just making him help to stay alive. So nice utility coming out of the Paladin as they now engage the first boss. Big Dumb Gaming engaging a little bit later, but they did 5% more trash on their side.
Yeah, and pulling that extra trash pack also definitely makes up for the fact that their bolstering was a little bit worse. So it makes sense they pulled more mobs so that it was harder for them to, cleave everything together with bolstering. But we do know that Fly Me Out also likes pulling that trash pack into the boss at the end, which is more than likely the extra trash pack that we saw Big Dumb Gaming pulled, so it shouldn't actually end up being that much of a net gain for them. That being said, we are going to see, especially on these bosses here, the fact that Big Dumb Gaming is running Double Hunter, which by far has greater single target potential than the comp that Fly Me Out is running. So they're just in general going to be pulling ahead on bosses. You can see they pulled this boss a solid 20% behind Fly Me Out. They're already caught up at this point.
Yeah. We'll see how that matters later on. It is a fortified setting, so but still, it's just boss damage definitely matters in this dungeon specifically because there's so many high HP mobs, especially later on in the Ring of Booty where you have Ludwig as well that you need to deal with, and you have the last boss and the Awaken mobs that you have to deal with as well. So we'll see later on how the damage difference is gonna show up for these two teams, as both of them seem to be getting the exact same boss percentage here. So definitely, as you mentioned, Big Dumb Gaming catching up, while Fly Me Out did pull the trash as well on top, as you can see now at the very end, because it is bolstering, so you don't want to bolster a boss, therefore they pull it at the end so they can cleave it down evenly, and that should be the percentage that they're behind. So they're both at 18%.
Yep, and you can see Versify and Jihad are already both doing the same thing. They're heading over to Ludwig von Tortolin's room early on. They're going to start that RP, get that pig spawned, and then they'll meet up with their team again at the Council of Captains when they're getting ready to pull that boss. And we'll end up seeing whether or not these teams are, comfortable with their bolstering while they're on bosses. I mean, so far we've seen both teams do a pretty solid job of it so far. Fly Me Out's doing much better than they were in the previous dungeon, but to this point, they're just ever so slightly behind where Big Dumb Gaming is right now.
Yeah, Fly Me Out, again, losing a couple of seconds because they have to do the pulling away the Enforcer strategy, because the Paladin cannot be a Night Elf. Therefore, they don't have the Shadow Melt, and they can't just run through and Shadow Melt off the Enforcer. So they needed Suffer, their Proud Warrior, to pull away the Enforcer, then come back and Shadow Melt off the aggro. So a little bit of a few seconds behind there as they now engage the second boss, and we're probably going to see some trash be pulled in, but only at the very end.
Yeah, at the very end when the bosses are incredibly low and they can use those brews to try to cleave them down. Of course, the name of the game on this boss, because we are perpetually in friendly Eudora mode with Jolly and Roll being the the angry captains in the tournament realm. There will always be brews being flung at these targets. You can see those brown swirlies on the ground. Those can do three things. They can either give you a crit buff, they can give you a haste buff, or they can be a bad brew, which will do a percentage amount of health to you if you get hit by it. So the name of the game is to try to pull as many mobs into that bad brew as possible, because it also affects enemies, and that's pretty much what the plan is. Try to pull as many trash mobs on top of that bad brew at the end of the boss as possible once you've dealt with both captains. So the dungeon pretty much essentially deals with the mobs for you, and you don't have to worry about doing any damage. Whichever team can pull that off will get a pretty massive advantage here. And we're seeing Big Dumb Gaming trying to pull it off right now as they pull all this trash on top of Captain Rowe.
Yeah, so Fly Me Out actually engaged the trash a little bit too early, it seemed like. I'm not sure if it was intended or if it was a mistake, but they needed to throw out some of those hunter traps, and we saw the Holy Paladin just taunting them away, so seeing them on the side to not kill them too early. But now they also pulled more trash on top of the rest of the boss fight here. Only Captain Rowe alive with 30% left. So yeah, both teams doing the exact same thing, just Big Dumb Gaming doing everything a little bit faster.
Oh yeah, it looks like they got a pretty good bad brew just now on a few of those mobs on the side of Fly Me Out, so that'll catch them up just a little bit. Big Time Gaming, like you mentioned, their bolstering management there, they didn't get that many bad brews, so it was not great. They were dealing with the rest of the trash pack for a long time. And Fly Me Out's actually doing a fantastic job of keeping Captain Raoul alive as long as possible. Ellesmere did drop incredibly low there to his Eye of Corruption plus some extra residual damage from the trash, but it looks like he was able to just barely keep himself alive. They still have their battle res available. Good that they have that later on because of that. And they are just now dealing with these final two trash mobs, so they didn't get good bad brew RNG at the end, but you know, just the way they dealt with those trash mobs at the end of the boss, it caught them up a slight bit in the dungeon here. They definitely have brought themselves back just a little bit.
Yeah, Big Time Gaming, on the other hand, was doing a Shadow Melt skip on their side. They were just walking all the way through to Ludwig that already got triggered by the Rogue. The Rogue already triggered the NPC event while they were still fighting the first boss, and then he was also catching the pig afterwards. So just doing some rogue things, stealthing through, making sure Ludwig was already there as they finished off the second boss. And now they're pulling two Crushers on top, which is something we don't see happen all the time, just because those Crushers have huge area of denials that they cast around them. But because they have two hunters that don't care about this area denial, and the rogue who has increased range because he's outlaw, they feel like they can just do this pull, and it seems to be worth it for them.
Ooh, that was a little scary there. Bay got bowled over by one of those turtle shells there. It's coming right at you, man. You can't get hit by that. But the other thing to mention as well, which we don't give, we talk about it sometimes when the opportunity presents itself, but the other thing is with 3 targets, hunters turn on the rapid reload trait, which was one of those Azurite traits they have available. Every time you hit multi-shot and it hits 3 or more targets, it resets the cooldown of your aspect of the wild by a little bit. So every single time you multi-shot on 3 targets, you get a little bit more of your cooldown back, and that's something that you can't really overlook. It's a lot of free damage that they'll end up gaining over the course of the dungeon. So pulling 2 of those Crushers there instead of 3, I like it. It's a little efficient, but also you got to remember, you have to, tailor make your mob count to make sure you get exactly the right amount. Otherwise you're being inefficient there. So we're probably going to see a little bit of a different pull pattern from them because of that, but I'm interested to see exactly what they end up pulling instead of what we see from, typical routes.
Yeah, and I just want to know one thing. So Ludwig doesn't actually bolster, and that's why they killed those 2 Crushers while Ludwig was still on like 50% HP, in case you guys were wondering why they did that. Ludwig does not get affected by it, and that's why they were abusing that fact and just pulled the Crushers on top. Now, it is a Fortified setting, so Ludwig still hits the tank for a lot of damage, and that's why you don't want to pull too much on top, but those 2 Crushers seem to be just fine for the tank to handle, and once the Crushers were dead, they pulled even more trash on top. So very efficient here by Big Damn Gaming as they now engage Strothak with Crushers again.
Yet another Crusher for Big Dumb Gaming, really kind of going all in on that cleave strategy here. And this is going to be interesting to see, because if that Crusher does some slams during the whirlwind, there's really going to be a lot of area denial, and their rogue Jihad has to be incredibly careful with his positioning. You actually saw Senek making sure he pulled the Crusher just slightly away from the boss, so there's some room for Jihad to actually get some damage in there, which is, you like to see that for sure. And answered the question right away. They've got it down.
Yeah.
Jihad dropping incredibly low there. Looks like there was a shark in melee, so taking a lot of damage from that, but managed to get the monk bubble from Bay before his cheat death proc, so he still has that available.
Yeah, and also topping the damage on his rogue here, so very well played on this like very anti-melee strategy that they're running. But they seem to be very confident in their rogue's ability to deal with all of this area of denial and want to make sure that he still does the most damage in his team. So well done by the rogue. Well, Fly Me Out delve some of the trash packs on the side before they are engaging Throwback here. They're at 57%, so they're 59% now, so slightly ahead compared to Big Damn Gaming. And this can all even out. I think both of these teams are actually really close. Even though Big Damn Gaming is slightly ahead on the boss, they're behind in trash, right? So this can all even itself out, and both of them 0 deaths so far, so very clean by both.
Yeah, and it was really weird. I think a lot of people are like, wait, why did they kill the Crusher on top of Throthak? We mentioned it earlier with Ludwig as well. The Crushers have weird like line of sight issues because of how big they are, so they don't end up actually bolstering the things next to them. So Throthak didn't get a bolstering stack from that Crusher when it died, so that's why they were able to do that. And yeah, just gonna go ahead and cleave down Throthak. And actually cleaving down those Crushers has given them a pretty large amount of percentage, and they're not really that far behind in terms of trash percentage from Fly Me Out, even though Fly Me Out has spent a long time gathering up that extra trash while Big Dumb Gaming's been on the boss. Interesting to see that from them. It seems like they actually have a pretty well thought out strategy in this dungeon so far on the side of BDG.
Yeah, it looks very interesting. Now, Fly Me Out on the other hand, with their difference in comp, while having this having the DK here, a little bit of a, I mean, it's not a damage loss if you just stand in a whirlwind like we just saw Shadow DK do here on Fly Me Outside, but the DK does not have as big of a range as the Outlaw Rogue, so when Throwback does the Whirlwind ability, you either have to see through it and just DPS through, like we just saw it happen, or he needs to go away and lose a bit of damage, as we can see it happen right now. So a little bit of a disadvantage for Fly Me Out on this particular boss.
One thing I want to mention as well, it seemed like BDG pulled their trash pack on Trothak a little bit late. It was like sub 20% when they pulled it in, which left them a lot less time to cleave down trash. But hold on a second here, as Sinek goes down, and he instantly released before the battle res could come out on top of him. So he's able to they're going to have to wait for him to come back in. It looks like they were able to get the binding shot out on most of the trash, so nobody ended up going down. But at this point, Hyper has finally gone down, and Sinek has just jumped back in and insta-died once again, and he's going to release again. This is just disaster for Big Dumb Gaming. 3 deaths on the board, and they have to kite out as much as possible here.
This is a big problem. It's so hard for him, even if he did manage to come back, it's so hard for him to get the aggro. It's a skittish environment as well. They did manage to get some of the binding shots out and like a Ring of Peace, but at this point, everything's just falling apart, and the trash mobs are not even close to dying. The problem as well is that it's Bolstering, so if you have all of those mobs be so spread out, it's super hard for them to kill them evenly, and if you have some mobs Bolstering, this might just be, maybe they just need to reset at this point, because they don't seem to be recovering. At this point, they're up to 8 deaths.
They're up to 8 deaths, and they're trying to stabilize, but it's going to be hard for Sinek because his healer isn't here, and the way he's been kiting is away from where his healer's releasing at. It looks like they're slowly able to get this down. Sinek now on 2%, but he's not taking any range damage right now. But if he gets chain hooked back in, he's instantly dead. Hyper goes down once again. Sham has one of the fixates on him, but he's also on low percentage here. Can you get in range of your healer, Sinek? That's the only way this pull is going to stabilize. You see Bade trying as hard as he can to get into range of his tank, but he got chain hooked back into the pack with the Lightfoot coming out from Sinek, and it looks like he got a hot on him, so they're going to be fine. But now you have to wait for your hunters to get back. You just have to keep kiting out this pull, and like you're mentioning, at this point, is it worth it for them? I mean, they just spent so much time trying to save that pull. I feel like if they just full wiped and went for the pull again, it might have actually been faster than this.
Yeah, I agree. I think, especially in a bolstering environment, kiting out a pull, I don't know. I mean, in the end, they did it. They needed to make a decision, and they decided to just try and kite it out. But it definitely looks like it was maybe not the best decision, because the amount of deaths they gathered just from this pull and the amount of time it's taking them to finish it off, especially because they could have just Shadow Melted off. They didn't even need to die. They could have just Shadow Melted off the aggro, feign death, de-aggro all the mobs, and then try again once the tank is back. But the amount of time they're losing for this is just insane. They're still working at it. The amount of bolstering stacks they have on these 2 mobs here means that it's still going to take them a long time to finish those 2 off. While Fly Me Out on the other side, they did lose their rogue, but they have much less trouble. They are in 80% trash now. They have the Bloodless available. They're about to pull the last boss with the Awakened mobs. And yeah, just the amount of time they lost for this one mistake they're doing here is just insane.
They saved the pull,
Yeah, they did.
but at what cost? 13 deaths on the board. They spent a solid 30 seconds finishing off those 2 bolstered mobs, which probably had 2 million HP each, even though they were only at 10% HP. And yeah, I mean, even though they saved the pull, it's going to be what costs them the dungeon in the end here. They probably should have just wiped it up. We can't go over that enough at this point. Fly Me Out. You know, they're sitting pretty up there. They've already pulled Harlan Sweet. We're not seeing any kite shenanigans from them. They're quickly bursting down that Blood of the Corruptor, and they'll probably go for the Beckoner of Chaos right afterwards. And they're looking pretty now. Literally, all they have to do to take this dungeon down now at this point is just get through this boss, and then they will be in the clear and into day 2 tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, this is still a very difficult pull for them to do because we have the boss and you also have the Awaken buffs at the same time. We saw one cast unfortunately going through here on the Holy Paladin, the Curse, which he cannot dispel. It just increases cast time, so that's not too good to have on your healer. But thankfully Holy Paladins have a lot of instant casts, so it should be fine as another Curse goes off on Ellesmere here. They gotta be a little bit careful. They do have 2 battle rests available though, and thankfully for them they have the DK with the rest, so they don't need the engineering rest. They can just use the instant rest from the DK. Well, on the other side, Big Dumb Gaming, they need to use that engineering rest, which just takes a little bit longer and is a little bit riskier to use as well.
Yeah, you know, you really like to see this from Fly Me Out for sure. I mean, this is a team that's, you know, buzzword consistent, so we've been saying it all day. It's a team that's struggled with that. They have not been consistent all day long. But in this series, they've really shown that they're able to put together an entire dungeon together, especially in this Freehold. This Freehold, 1 death on the board. It's clean. It's what you like to see from these teams, and if they're able to put this together for their runs tomorrow, they got a chance of taking some games off some of the better teams. They just have to make sure they play like this and not like the Fly Me Out that we've seen earlier today.
Yeah, I agree. They definitely have potential to do. I mean, if they're doing as well as this Freehold here, they also have a pretty impressive time as well. Just really well done overall, considering that they're running the Holy Paladin in a lot of their dungeons, which definitely is not the most like the best pick, because we've just seen what a Mistweaver can do in those kind of dungeons. But Ellesmere doing a good job pulling off that Holy Paladin, and you can also see it in damage on some of those pulls, right? Holy Paladin definitely doing a lot of single target damage and also being able to do quite a bit of AoE damage on some of those pulls. So definitely pulling off the Holy Paladin pretty well. Also, again, the utility, as we mentioned, with the Bob on the Unholy DK, making sure they can just ignore the Skittish while just using all of their cooldowns, not worrying about aggro at all.
Little weird from Fly Me Out here. The boss is at 3%. Oh, they have stopped damage on the boss, and they are now pulling the boss into the trash. Now they're going to use this cannon barrage to finish off the rest of the trash here. I'm not quite sure they have quite enough cannon barrages on that trash to deal with it in one cannon barrage. Yeah, they missed a ton of them there, so they're going to have to wait until the next one. But the boss is already dead, so they'll have to manually DPS the rest of this trash down. And on top of that, it's not quite enough trash percentage to finish off their mob count as well. They'll have to have one other DPS, or maybe just as a group go off to pull the priestesses to cast those painful motivations afterwards. Again, you know, we were talking about how they're cleaning this dungeon so far, but this last pull has been not quite that. And now they've also pulled the officer on top of it. What's going on, guys? That's just going to bolster. Your tank's going to die.
Yeah, the tank actually going down. They do have a Belrus available, but the DK going down immediately afterwards. Yeah, he actually did manage to get the Belrus off, but it seems like they're just resetting this pull at this point because the amount of bolstering stacks they had was just not worth it for them to continue. But thankfully, they don't need to go back because they only need a little bit of trash. They can just pull something else, as we can see them all releasing and actually just pull this trash here instead. But yeah, that last pull definitely did not work out for them.
Don't they still have a painful motivation in the corner where the obelisk is that they can pull as well?
Yeah.
But the travel time, but they, my hands are up. I no
really
longer
close.
know what's going on at this point. The only reason that Fly Me Out isn't throwing the dungeon right now is because of those extra 8 seconds on the board. When they knew that was a wipe, you saw Asuna just literally ran and said, "I'm gonna die instantly." So those 40 seconds on the board, now 45 seconds in the form of Beyblade dying on this final boss here, is going to be the difference in this dungeon here. They're both going to finish the dungeon at roughly the same point with just 1% trash left on the board.
They missed it!
They missed count.
Are they going to kill one mob, mark a skull? They've got a skull. Burn that mob. It'll finish the dungeon for you. Oh, man, this is... Oh, no.
That's rough.
We were just singing to your praises, Fly Me Out. We were saying you were doing so good, and this happens. That's going to be the dungeon. Fly Me Out finishes the trash mob, going up 2-1 and being the final of our teams to make it to day 2.
That was not pretty. It was not perfect. But they got through it. Fly Me Out taking the 2-1 over BDG, and